when NBA superstar Kevin Durant spotted a thin, homeless man on a park bench in his old neighborhood, he never expected to recognize those familiar eyes. The man was Marcus Powell, once his inseparable childhood friend, now living on the streets. Their reunion would change both their lives forever, revealing a decades-old secret that explains why Kevin was so determined to help the friend who once saved him in ways nobody knew. Kevin Durant had everything money could buy, but something was missing in his golden life. Kevin Durant sat at the head table of Le Ciel, the fanciest restaurant in the city. The room glowed with soft golden lights that matched the shimmer of the championship trophy sitting in the middle of the table. All around him, his teammates laughed and clinked glasses. They had won tonight. Again. "To KD!" shouted Jason, raising his glass high. 42 points! The man is unstoppable! Everyone cheered. Kevin smiled and nodded, but something felt off, empty. He had felt this way a lot lately. The waiter brought out plates of food that cost more than what some people made in a day. Steak so tender you barely needed a knife. Lobster tails. Fancy vegetables with names Kevin couldn't even pronounce. "You okay, man?" asked Devin, his closest friend on the team. "You look like you're a million miles away." "I'm good," Kevin said, picking up his fork. "Just tired, I guess." But that wasn't it. Kevin had been tired before. This was different. He pulled out his phone while the others talked about the game. His finger scrolled through messages from people wanting things. Congratulations from people he barely knew. His agent, his manager, his shoe company. Everyone wanted a piece of Kevin Durant. A news story caught his eye. Washington, D.C.'s East Side community gets new basketball court after 10 years. There was a picture of kids playing on a shiny new court. Kevin zoomed in on the photo. That was his old neighborhood, the place where he grew up, the place where he first learned to dribble a ball, the place where he met Marcus. Marcus Powell. Kevin hadn't thought about Marcus in years. Well, that wasn't exactly true. He thought about him sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, when the big, empty house felt too quiet, when the cheers from the game had faded away. Marcus and Kevin had been inseparable once. From third grade through freshman year of high school, you couldn't find one without the other. They played basketball every day at the park on Maple Street. They shared lunches when one of them forgot theirs. They walked to school together, rain or shine. "Remember when we're famous, we stick together," Marcus used to say, holding out his pinky finger. "Always," Kevin would answer, linking his pinky with Marcus's. Powell and Durant, friends forever. Kevin stared at his phone, at the kids playing on the new court. He and Marcus had played on the old one, with its cracked concrete and chain nets that were always breaking. They'd played in the rain, in the snow, in the dark with only streetlights to see by. "Earth to Kevin!" Devin waved a hand in front of his face. "Coach is about to give a toast." Kevin put his phone away and picked up his water glass. He didn't drink alcohol during the season. That was one of his rules. One of the many rules he followed to stay at the top. Coach Williams stood up, his championship ring from last year catching the light. "Gentlemen, another amazing win, but this is just the beginning." Kevin tried to focus on the words, but his mind kept drifting back to that picture, back to Marcus, back to the promise they had made. What had happened to Marcus Powell? They had lost touch when Kevin transferred to a better school for his basketball program. Marcus had been happy for him, had hugged him tight, and said, "Go, get him, KD. Show him what East Side boys can do." Kevin had promised to call, to visit, They had texted for a while, but then Kevin got busy with his new team. New friends, new life. The texts became less frequent. Then they stopped altogether. Did Marcus ever make it out of East Side? Did he go to college like he planned? Did he still play basketball? Kevin, want to say a few words? Coach asked, interrupting his thoughts. Kevin stood up, smoothing his custom-made suit that probably cost more than what his mom used to make in a month. "Great win tonight, guys," he said. "Couldn't have done it without you all." The right words. The words they expected from team captain Kevin Durant. He said a few more things about teamwork and looking ahead to the next game. Everyone clapped. He sat down. Later, as they were leaving the restaurant, fans waited outside behind velvet ropes. They screamed when they saw Kevin, held out basketballs and jerseys for him to sign. "KD, KD, you're the greatest." "Can I get a picture, Kevin?" "Please, my son is your biggest fan." Kevin stopped and signed a few items, took a few pictures, smiled. The smile that had been on magazine covers and billboards. But as his driver held the door to his luxury car open, Kevin paused, looked back at the crowd of faces. All strangers, all wanting something from him. When was the last time someone had known the real Kevin? Not KD, the basketball star. Not Durant, the millionaire. Just Kevin from East Side who loved Fruit Loops and was afraid of spiders. Marcus had known that Kevin. Inside the car, Kevin pulled out his phone again. He found the news story about his old neighborhood and read it fully this time. The article mentioned how the area was changing. Some parts better, some worse. Kevin stared out the window as the car moved through the city streets. Bright lights and tall buildings passed by. So different from the neighborhood where he grew up. An idea formed in his mind. He had 3 days off before the next game. The team wasn't traveling. "Hey," he said to his driver, "I need to make a trip tomorrow." "Where to, Mr. Durant?" Kevin took a deep breath. "Washington, D.C. East Side," the driver nodded. "I'll make the arrangements, sir." Kevin leaned back in the soft leather seat. For the first time in weeks, the empty feeling faded a little. Maybe going back would help. Maybe he could find out what happened to Marcus. Maybe he could keep that pinky promise from so long ago. Kevin woke up early the next morning. His usual breakfast of egg whites and protein smoothie waited for him, prepared by his personal chef. But today, Kevin only took a few sips of the smoothie. His stomach felt tight with nervousness. "Everything okay with the smoothie, Mr. Durant?" asked Gloria, his chef. "It's perfect," Kevin said. "I'm just not very hungry this morning." He checked his phone. His driver would be ready in 30 minutes. Plenty of time to change his mind, to forget this whole idea. But Kevin didn't change his mind. He put on jeans and a simple black t-shirt, no designer labels. He grabbed a baseball cap and sunglasses. Not a perfect disguise, but it might help him blend in a little. The drive to Washington, D.C. took a few hours. Kevin spent most of it looking out the window, watching the world change from city to countryside and back to city again. He thought about texting Devin to tell him where he was going, but decided against it. This trip felt private somehow, personal. "We're about 20 minutes from East Side, Mr. Durant," his driver announced. Kevin nodded, his heart beating faster. He hadn't been back to his old neighborhood in almost 10 years. What would it look like now? Would he recognize it? Would anyone recognize him? The car turned onto familiar streets. Some things looked exactly the same. The corner store where he used to buy candy, the small church with its white steeple. Other things had changed completely. There was a fancy coffee shop where the old barber shop used to be. Several apartment buildings had been repainted in bright colors. "This is good," Kevin said as they approached his old street. "I'll walk from here." "Are you sure, sir?" The driver looked concerned. "I can wait. I'm sure. I'll call when I need you." Kevin stepped out of the car. The air smelled different. Here, a mix of car exhaust, cooking food from open windows, and a hint of garbage from overflowing trash cans. Not the clean, filtered air of his mansion or the team facilities. He pulled his cap lower and started walking. A few people glanced his way, but most were busy with their own lives. A mother hurried past, pulling a small child by the hand. Our old man sat on a folding chair outside his apartment building, nodding at Kevin as he passed by. Kevin stopped in front of a 3-story brick apartment building, his old home. Apartment 2B, where he had lived with his mom until he was 14. The building looked smaller than he remembered. The front steps were cracked, and one of the windows had a piece of cardboard where glass should be. Kevin stood there for a long moment, remembering. This was where he'd wait for Marcus every morning before school. This was where they'd sit on hot summer days, sharing a single popsicle split in half. This was where his mom would call from the window, "Kevin Durant, you get in here right now. It's dinner time." A young boy came out of the building, bouncing a basketball. He stopped when he saw Kevin staring. "You looking for somebody?" the boy asked. Kevin shook his head. "Just passing through." "Nice ball," the boy shrugged. "It's okay. The air keeps leaking out." Kevin remembered that problem. He and Marcus would save up change to use the air pump at the gas station. "Keep practicing," Kevin said to the boy. "You never know where basketball might take you." The boy nodded and continued bouncing the ball down the street. Kevin watched him go, feeling a strange mix of emotions. That could have been him and Marcus 20 years ago. Kevin continued walking. 3 blocks down was their old elementary school, PS 118. The building had been updated with a new playground and a fresh coat of paint, but the fence was the same. The fence where he and Marcus had traded basketball, cards during recess. Next, Kevin headed toward Maple Street Park. This was where they had spent most of their time, playing basketball until it was too dark to see the hoop. The park looked better than he expected. There were new benches, trash, cans, and a small garden area. And there was the basketball court from the news article, shiny and new, with proper nets and painted lines. A few teenagers were playing a pickup game. Kevin watched from a distance, smiling at their trash talk and wild shots. He and Marcus had played just like that. More energy than skill, more heart than technique. One of the boys made a move that Kevin recognized, a spin move to the basket that he himself had made famous in the NBA. Seeing it here, in his old park, felt like a full-circle moment. Kevin's stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten much breakfast. He checked the time. Almost noon. He and Marcus used to go to Gino's Pizza after playing ball, sharing a pepperoni slice because that was all they could afford. Was Gino's still there? Kevin started walking toward Jefferson Avenue, where the small pizza place had been. As he turned the corner, he saw the familiar red and green sign, Gino's Pizza, since 1982. Some things didn't change. The bell on the door jingled as Kevin walked in. The smell hit him immediately. Tomato sauce, baking dough, and garlic. The same smell from his childhood. The place looked almost exactly as he remembered. Red checkered tablecloths, wooden chairs, and photos of famous Italian landmarks on the walls. An old man looked up from behind the counter. His hair was white now, not the dark gray Kevin remembered, but the bushy eyebrows were the same. "Mr. Gino?" Kevin asked, taking off his sunglasses. The old man squinted, then his eyes went wide. Kevin Durant? Is that really you? Kevin smiled. It's me. Mr. Gino came around the counter, arms outstretched. Look at you, all grown up and a big star now. Your mother must be so proud. She is, Kevin said, accepting the hug. His mom lived in a nice house that Kevin had bought her in a different state. Sit, sit. Mr. Gino pointed to a table. I'll bring you your usual. You still like pepperoni, right? Kevin was surprised the man remembered. Yes, sir. Thank you. As Mr. Gino went to prepare the pizza, Kevin looked around the restaurant. A framed newspaper article on the wall caught his attention. He walked over to look at it. It was about the high school basketball state championships from 12 years ago. There was a photo of Kevin, much younger and skinnier, holding a trophy. Standing next to him, arm around his shoulders, was Marcus Powell. Kevin stared at the photo. They looked so happy, so certain of their bright futures. Here we go, 1 pepperoni slice, extra cheese, just like old times, Mr. Gino said, setting a plate in front of Kevin. On the house, of course. Thank you, Kevin said, sitting down. Mr. Gino, do you remember Marcus Powell? We used to come in here together, all the time. The old man's smile faded a little. Marcus? Yes, I remember him. Good boy. Very funny. Always making jokes. Do you know what happened to him? Where he is now? Mr. Gino wiped his hands on his apron. No, I haven't seen him in many years. Not since you left for that fancy school. Kevin nodded, disappointed but not surprised. It had been a long shot. But you know, Mr. Gino added, you might ask around at the park. I think I heard someone say they saw him there a while back. Kevin's heart jumped. Recently? Maybe a few months ago? I don't remember exactly. Mr. Gino shrugged. I could be mistaken. It wasn't much, but it was something. Kevin took a bite of his pizza, the flavor taking him right back to his childhood. As he ate, he made a plan. He would walk back to the park after lunch. Maybe someone there would know more about Marcus. Maybe, just maybe, he could find his old friend and keep that pinky promise after all. Kevin finished his pizza and thanked Mr. Gino. The old man insisted on taking a photo together, which Kevin agreed to with a smile. He had a feeling the photo would soon join the collection on Gino's wall. Come back before you leave town, Mr. Gino called as Kevin headed for the door. I'll make you a whole pizza, just like I used to make for you and Marcus when you won your games. Kevin waved goodbye and stepped back into the afternoon sun. The neighborhood felt different now. Before lunch, he had been walking through memories. Now, he was on a mission. He turned back toward Maple Street Park, walking at a faster pace. The teenagers he had seen earlier were gone from the basketball court. A group of younger kids had taken their place, running and laughing more than actually playing basketball. Kevin approached a woman watching the children from a bench. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm looking for someone who might come to this park. His name is Marcus Powell." The woman looked at Kevin suspiciously, then her eyes widened with recognition. "Aren't you—" Kevin nodded quickly. "Yes, but please keep it down. I'm trying to find an old friend." The woman seemed to understand. "I don't know any Marcus Powell. I only bring my kids here on Tuesdays and Thursdays." Kevin thanked her and moved on. He asked a few more people around the park, but no one knew Marcus or hadn't seen him recently. One older man thought the name sounded familiar, but couldn't place it. Discouraged, Kevin decided to walk through the surrounding streets. Maybe Marcus lived nearby. Maybe someone would know something. He passed the community center where he and Marcus had attended summer programs as kids. It had been renovated, with a new sign announcing classes in computer skills and job training. Kevin made a mental note to find out if they needed funding. He could help with that. As Kevin turned onto Bradford Avenue, he noticed a small park he didn't remember from his childhood. It wasn't much, just a few benches and some trees, but it looked peaceful. Several people sat on the benches, reading or just watching the world go by. Kevin was about to walk past when something caught his eye. On the furthest bench, a thin man sat alone. He wore jeans with holes in them and a faded blue jacket that looked too big for his frame. A small backpack rested on the bench beside him. Something about the way the man sat, shoulders slightly hunched, feet planted firmly on the ground, seemed familiar. The man's face was partly hidden by a worn baseball cap, the logo too faded to recognize. Kevin slowed his pace, trying to get a better look without being obvious. The man kept his head down, staring at the ground or maybe at his shoes, old sneakers that had once been white but were now a dirty gray. As Kevin walked by, something made him stop. He couldn't explain it, but something pulled at him, urging him to take another look at the man on the bench. At that moment, as if feeling Kevin's gaze, the man looked up briefly. Their eyes met for just a second before the man quickly looked down again. But that second was enough. Those eyes, dark brown with flecks of gold near the pupils. Kevin had teased Marcus about those eyes when they were kids, saying he had little suns inside them. Could it be? After all these years, could he have found Marcus by pure chance? Kevin wanted to approach the man, to ask if he was Marcus Powell. But something held him back. The man looked so different from the Marcus he remembered. Thinner, older, worn down by life. What if it wasn't him? What if it was, but Marcus didn't want to be found? While Kevin stood frozen with indecision, the man on the bench stood up, grabbed his backpack, and walked quickly toward the other end of the park. He disappeared around a corner before Kevin could make up his mind. Kevin cursed under his breath. He should have said something. Should have at least tried. He walked to the bench where the man had been sitting. There was nothing left behind. No clue to the man's identity. Just an empty bench in a small park. Kevin sat down, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was that really Marcus? The eyes had seemed so familiar, but everything else about the man was different from the friend he remembered. Marcus had been strong, athletic, always smiling. This man looked beaten down, cautious, hidden inside two large clothes. Kevin pulled out his phone and found an old photo of him and Marcus from high school. Marcus grinned at the camera, his arm thrown around Kevin's shoulders. Those same dark eyes with golden flecks shone with confidence and joy. Kevin looked up from his phone in the direction the man had gone. If it was Marcus, why was he living like this? What had happened to him? A woman walking her dog passed by. Kevin stopped her. "Excuse me, do you know a man who sometimes sits on this bench? Thin guy, blue jacket, baseball cap?" The woman nodded. "I see him here almost every day. Keeps to himself, but he's always polite. Says good morning, compliments my dog. Not like some of the other homeless people around here." "Homeless?" Kevin repeated, his heart sinking. "Do you know his name?" "No, sorry. We've never actually introduced ourselves." The woman continued on her way, her little dog trotting beside her. Kevin remained on the bench, his mind racing. Homeless. The word echoed in his head. Could Marcus really be homeless? Living on the streets while Kevin lived in a mansion with more rooms than he could use? The thought made Kevin's stomach twist with guilt. If that was Marcus, and he was becoming more and more certain that it was, then he had to find him again. Had to help him. Kevin stood up, determined now. He would look for the man in the blue jacket, would confirm if it was really Marcus. would make things right, somehow. As the afternoon turned to evening, Kevin walked the surrounding streets. He checked alleyways, convenience stores, anywhere the man might have gone. But there was no sign of him. The sun was starting to set when Kevin finally called his driver. He couldn't search all night, much as he wanted to, but he would come back tomorrow. Would keep looking until he found the man again. As the luxury car pulled away from East Side, Kevin looked back at the neighborhood where he had grown up, where he had dreamed of basketball glory with his best friend by his side. That face in the crowd, those familiar eyes, haunted him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had found Marcus only to lose him again. Kevin barely slept that night in his hotel room. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the face of the man in the park. Those eyes. Marcus's eyes. The hotel was the fanciest one in the city. The sheets were soft, the room was quiet, and the bed was perfect. But Kevin tossed and turned all night. He kept thinking about the man with the worn-out shoes and faded jacket. If that was Marcus, where was he sleeping tonight? By morning, Kevin had made up his mind. He would find the man again. He would make sure if it was Marcus. He would not leave Washington, D.C. until he knew for sure. After a quick breakfast, Kevin headed back to East Side. His driver offered to help search, but Kevin wanted to do this alone. This was between him and Marcus. The small park on Bradford Avenue was empty when Kevin arrived. No sign of the thin man with the backpack. Kevin sat on the same bench as yesterday, hoping the man would return to his usual spot. 1 hour passed, then another. People came and went. A mail carrier, a group of moms with strollers, 2 old men playing chess on another bench. No sign of the man who might be Marcus. Kevin's leg bounced with nervous energy. He wasn't good at waiting. On the basketball court, he was always moving, always active. Sitting still made him anxious. Finally, he decided to try a different approach. He walked to the nearby convenience store. The bell jingled as he entered, reminding him of Gino's Pizza. A young woman stood behind the counter looking bored. "Excuse me," Kevin said, keeping his voice low. "I'm looking for someone who might come in here sometimes. Thin guy, wears a blue jacket and a baseball cap. Might be homeless." The woman's bored expression didn't change. "You mean Powell?" she asked. "Yeah, he comes in most mornings for coffee, pays with coins and small bills." Kevin's heart raced. "Powell? Is his first name Marcus?" The woman shrugged. "Don't know his first name. Everyone just calls him Powell." "What time does he usually come in?" "Early, like 6:30 or 7. Sometimes he helps Mr. Kim sweep outside before we open, and Mr. Kim gives him coffee and a donut." Kevin checked his watch. It was already past noon. "Do you know where I might find him now?" "No idea. He's around the neighborhood. Keeps to himself, mostly." She gave Kevin a suspicious look. "Why are you looking for him? He in some kind of trouble?" "No, nothing like that," Kevin assured her. "If he's who I think he is, he's an old friend. I haven't seen him in years." The woman's expression softened slightly. "Well, he's been around here for a long time, at least 5 or 6 years. Nice guy, down on his luck." Kevin thanked her and bought a bottle of water before leaving the store. Powell. It had to be Marcus. How many homeless men named Powell could there be in this neighborhood? Back outside, Kevin felt a mix of emotions. Relief that he was on the right track. Excitement at being close to finding his friend. Sadness that Marcus had been living on the streets for years. Kevin walked toward Maple Street Park thinking Marcus might go there. The basketball court was busy with a game. Kevin watched for a few minutes, scanning the faces of the people sitting around the court. No sign of Marcus. He continued walking, checking alleys and side streets. He asked more people if they had seen Powell. Some hadn't heard of him. Others knew him but hadn't seen him today. An older woman sweeping her front steps told Kevin, "Powell sometimes helps at the community center kitchen when they serve lunch to homeless folks. You might try there." The community center was only a few blocks away. Kevin remembered it well from his childhood. He and Marcus had spent many summer days there, playing games and staying out of trouble. The lunch program was just finishing when Kevin arrived. People were leaving the cafeteria, heading back out to the streets. Kevin scanned every face, looking for Marcus. "Can I help you?" asked a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair. "I'm looking for someone named Powell," Kevin explained. "I heard he sometimes comes here for lunch." The woman nodded. "He does, but he wasn't here today." "Are you a friend of his?" "An old friend. We grew up together." The woman smiled. "That's nice. Powell could use a friend. He's been struggling for a long time." "Do you know his full name?" Kevin asked. "Is it Marcus Powell?" The woman thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I believe it is Marcus. He filled out some forms once for our job placement program. Never followed through with it, though." Kevin felt his heart skip a beat. It was true. He had found Marcus, or at least found out where Marcus was. "Thank you," he said. "I really need to find him. If I see him, who should I say is looking for him?" Kevin hesitated, then said, "Just tell him KD is looking for him. He'll know who that is." As Kevin left the community center, the feeling that had haunted him all night grew stronger. He had to find Marcus, had to make things right. Kevin spent the rest of the day searching East Side for Marcus. The afternoon sun beat down on him as he walked street after street. He stopped in stores, asked in restaurants, checked the parks again. No one had seen Powell today. "It's like he disappeared," Kevin muttered to himself as he stopped to drink some water. He'd been walking for hours. His fancy sneakers, designed for basketball courts, not city streets, were starting to hurt his feet. Kevin sat on a bench to rest. He pulled out his phone and looked through his contacts. His finger hovered over his assistant's name. Megan could help. She could hire people to find Marcus. They could search the whole city, check shelters, hospitals, everywhere. But something stopped him from making the call. This felt personal, like something he needed to do himself. Instead, Kevin scrolled through his photos until he found more. Pictures of him and Marcus from high school. In one, they stood side by side after winning a tournament. Their jerseys were soaked with sweat, but their smiles were huge. In another, they sat on Kevin's mom's front steps, eating ice cream and making silly faces. They had been more than friends. They had been brothers. As the sun started to set, Kevin reluctantly called his driver. He was tired and hungry, and night was coming. He would rest, eat, and start again tomorrow. "Any luck, Mr. Durant?" the driver asked, as Kevin slid into the back seat. "Not yet," Kevin answered, "but I'm not giving up." Back at the hotel, Kevin ordered room service. As he waited for his food, he pulled out his laptop and did something he should have done earlier. He searched online for Marcus Powell, Washington, D.C. Nothing useful came up. No social media profiles that matched. No news stories. No arrest records, which was good. Marcus seemed to have fallen through the cracks of society, becoming invisible. In the digital world, Kevin's food arrived, but he barely tasted it. His mind was too busy thinking about Marcus. What had happened to him? How had he ended up homeless? The woman at the convenience store had said he'd been around for 5 or 6 years. What about before that? Kevin thought back to their high school days. Marcus had been a good student, not top of the class, but solid. He'd talked about going to college, maybe becoming a physical therapist. He'd been good with people, good at making them feel better. After dinner, Kevin called his mom. He needed to hear her voice, needed her wisdom. "Kevin? Is everything okay?" "You never call this late," she said, worry in her voice. "I'm fine, Mom. I'm in D.C., in East Side." There was a pause. "Our old neighborhood? Why?" Kevin explained about seeing the news story, about feeling empty despite his success, about searching for Marcus. "Oh, honey," his mom said softly. "I wondered when you'd start looking for him. You knew I would. You two were inseparable. That kind of friendship doesn't just disappear, even with time and distance." She was quiet for a moment. "Have you found him?" "Sort of. I think I saw him yesterday. And people in the neighborhood know him. They call him Powell. But he's..." Kevin's voice broke. "Mom, he's homeless." His mom sighed deeply. "I'd heard rumors. One of my old church friends mentioned it a few years ago. I didn't want to believe it." "Why didn't you tell me?" Kevin asked, a flash of anger rising in him. "What would you have done back then? You were just starting in the NBA, focused on your career. And..." She hesitated. "And Marcus made me promise not to tell you." "You talked to him?" Kevin sat up straight. "Just once, about 8 years ago. He called me out of the blue. Asked how you were doing. Asked me not to tell you he called. He said he was fine, but I could tell he wasn't. I tried to get him to talk to you, but he refused. Said he didn't want to be your charity case." Kevin felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Marcus had reached out, not to him, but to his mom. Had made her promise to keep his secret. Do you know what happened to him? Why he ended up on the streets? "No, honey. He didn't say much about himself. Just asked about you. Seemed proud of what you were accomplishing." His mom's voice was sad. "I gave him my number, told him to call any time. He never did." After hanging up with his mom, Kevin couldn't sleep. He paced his hotel room, thinking about what she had told him. Marcus had been keeping tabs on him, had been proud of him, but hadn't wanted Kevin to know about his own situation. Why? Pride? Shame? Or something else? Kevin went to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Marcus was sleeping tonight. Maybe in a shelter if he was lucky. Maybe on a park bench if he wasn't. Kevin made up his mind. He would not leave D.C. without finding Marcus, without trying to help him whether Marcus wanted help or not. The next morning, Kevin was up before dawn. He called his team manager and told him he needed another day in D.C. Maybe 2. "Is everything okay?" the manager asked. "You've never missed practice before." "Family emergency," Kevin said. It wasn't exactly a lie. Marcus was family, in all the ways that mattered. Kevin headed back to East Side as the sun was rising. The convenience store had just opened. The same young woman from yesterday was behind the counter, looking even more tired and bored. "You again," she said when Kevin walked in. "Me again," Kevin agreed. "Is Powell here yet?" She shook her head. "No, and he's usually here by now. Mr. Kim was looking for him too. Powell always helps with the morning cleaning." Kevin thanked her and walked back outside. The streets were quiet this early. A few people hurried to bus stops, heading to work. A garbage truck rumbled down the street. Kevin decided to check the small park on Bradford Avenue again. Maybe Marcus would return to the bench where Kevin had first seen him. The park was empty when Kevin arrived. The morning dew still clung to the grass. Kevin sat on Marcus's bench and waited, watching the sunrise paint the sky gold and pink. He pulled out his phone and looked at the old photos again. In one picture, taken right before a big game, he and Marcus did their special handshake. It had been their ritual before every game, a complicated series of movements ending with their pinky promise. "Where are you, Marcus?" Kevin whispered, to the empty park. As if in answer, a figure appeared at the far end of the park. A thin man in a faded blue jacket, a worn baseball cap pulled low, a small backpack slung over one shoulder. Kevin's heart pounded. He stood up slowly, not wanting to startle the man, not wanting to scare Marcus away again. "Marcus?" he called, his voice carrying across the quiet park. "Marcus Powell?" The man stopped, looked up. Their eyes met across the distance. After all, these years, the search was finally over. For a moment, neither man moved. They stood frozen like statues, staring at each other across the small park. Kevin could see Marcus's face clearly now in the morning light. It was thinner than he remembered, with lines that hadn't been there before. His once short, neat hair was now longer and unkempt under the baseball cap. But those eyes, those were the same eyes that had lit up when they made their three-point shots, the same eyes that had cried when Kevin left for his new school, the same eyes that had looked out from all those old photos. "Marcus," Kevin said again, taking a step forward. Marcus took a step back. For a terrible second, Kevin thought he might run away. Then Marcus shook his head slowly. "I knew you'd find me eventually," he said, his voice rougher than Kevin remembered. "I saw your fancy car driving around the neighborhood yesterday." Kevin took another cautious step forward. "Why didn't you come talk to me?" Marcus looked down at his worn shoes. "What was I supposed to say? Hey, KD, long time no see. By the way, I live on the streets now while you make millions playing ball." The bitterness in Marcus's voice felt like a slap. Kevin stopped moving toward him. "I've been looking everywhere for you," Kevin said. "When I saw you on this bench yesterday, I wasn't sure it was really you." "Well, now you know." Marcus gestured at himself. "This is me now, not exactly what we planned back in the day, huh?" Kevin didn't know what to say. The Marcus he remembered had been full of life, full of dreams. This Marcus seemed hollow, his voice flat and tired. "What happened, Marcus?" Kevin asked quietly. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Life happened. Bad luck happened. Bad choices happened." He looked up at Kevin. "What do you want, Kevin? Why are you here?" "I wanted to find you," Kevin said simply. "I saw a news story about our old neighborhood, and I started thinking about you, about us, about the promise we made." "That pinky promise?" Marcus snorted. "We were kids, Kevin. Kids say all kinds of stupid things." Kevin felt a flash of anger. "It wasn't stupid to me." Marcus's shoulders sagged. He suddenly looked very tired. "Look, you found me. Now you can go back to your perfect life with a clear conscience. You did your good deed for the decade." "That's not why I'm here," Kevin said, his own voice rising. "I'm here because you're my friend. Because I care about what happens to you." "Friend?" Marcus's voice was sharp now. "Friends don't disappear for 15 years. Friends check in. Friends are there when your mom dies, and you have no one else to call." Kevin felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "Your mom died? When?" 8 years ago. Cancer." Marcus kicked at a pebble on the ground. "Hospital bills took everything I had. Lost my apartment. Lost my job because I missed too many shifts taking care of her. He looked up at Kevin, his eyes hard. "I called your mom once, asked how you were doing, didn't tell her how bad things were. Didn't want anyone's pity." Kevin remembered what his mom had told him, how she'd known Marcus wasn't fine, even though he'd said he was. "I'm sorry about your mom," Kevin said softly. "She was always good to me." Some of the hardness left Marcus's face. "Yeah, she liked you. Used to brag to the neighbors about how her son's friend was going to be an NBA star someday." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Guess she was right about that. An awkward silence fell between them. A jogger ran past, not giving either of them a second look. A bird sang from a nearby tree. "Have you had breakfast?" Kevin asked suddenly. Marcus looked surprised by the question. "What?" "Breakfast. The meal people eat in the morning." Kevin tried to keep his voice light. "I'm starving. There's a diner on Jefferson Avenue that used to make great pancakes. Is it still there?" Marcus hesitated. "Lou's? Yeah, it's still there." "Want to join me?" Kevin asked. "Just breakfast. 2 old friends catching up. No pressure. No pity." Marcus looked like he was about to refuse. He glanced down at his dirty clothes, then at Kevin's clean, expensive outfit. "They know me at Lou's," Marcus said quietly. "They let me wash dishes sometimes for meals, but I can't go in there with you. People will stare." "So let them stare," Kevin said. "I'm used to it." "I'm not," Marcus shot back. "Not like this?" Kevin thought for a moment. "What if we get it to go? We could eat here, at the park." Marcus considered this. "You, Mr. NBA star, want to eat breakfast on a park bench?" "Why not? We used to eat lunch on the school steps all the time. Remember when I dropped my whole sandwich and you gave me half of yours?" A real smile flickered across Marcus's face. "PB&J with the crusts cut off. Your mom always cut off the crusts." "So? Breakfast?" Kevin pressed. After what seemed like an eternity, Marcus nodded. "Fine, but I'm paying for my own." Kevin knew better than to argue. "Deal." They walked to Lou's diner together, keeping a careful distance between them. Kevin couldn't help noticing how Marcus walked with his head down, how he seemed to be trying to make himself smaller, less noticeable. At the diner, Kevin ordered pancakes and bacon to go. Marcus ordered just coffee. "That's not breakfast," Kevin said. "It's what I want," Marcus insisted, pulling a few crumpled dollar bills from his pocket. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, looked from Marcus to Kevin and back again. "Powell, this gentleman a friend of yours?" Marcus nodded stiffly. "From a long time ago," the waitress smiled. "Well, any friend of Powell's is welcome here. Powell helps us out sometimes," she explained to Kevin. "Real good with fixing things. Fixed our broken coffee machine last month when the repair guy wanted to charge us a fortune." Kevin saw Marcus stand a little straighter at the praise. "He was always good with his hands," Kevin told the waitress. "Used to fix our bikes when we were kids." When their food was ready, Kevin added a breakfast sandwich to the order and paid before Marcus could object. They took the food back to the park and sat on the bench where Kevin had first spotted Marcus. For a few minutes, they ate in silence. Kevin snuck glances at Marcus, noticing how carefully he ate the sandwich, taking small bites as if to make it last longer. "I'm not here to fix you, you know," Kevin said finally. Marcus looked up, surprised. "What?" "I'm not here to be your savior or to throw money at you and then disappear again," Kevin explained. "I'm here because when I saw that news story about our old neighborhood, I realized something was missing in my life. Success, money, fame, I have all that. But I don't have many real friends, People who knew me before I was KD, the basketball star. People who aren't afraid to call me on my bull. Marcus took a sip of his coffee. And you think that's me? After all this time? I don't know, Kevin said honestly. But I'd like to find out, if you'll give me a second chance. Marcus stared at his coffee cup for a long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were shining with unshed tears. I don't want your pity, Kevin, he said, his voice rough. And I don't want to be your charity project. Good, because I'm not offering either of those things, Kevin replied. I'm offering friendship, the real kind, the kind we used to have. Marcus shook his head. We can't go back to that. Too much has happened. We're different people now. I know that, Kevin said, but maybe we can start something new, something better. A small smile tugged at the corner of Marcus's mouth. Always the optimist, weren't you? One of us had to be, Kevin grinned. You were always worrying about everything. Yeah, well, turns out I was right to worry, Marcus said, but there was less bitterness in his voice now. They sat in silence again, but it was more comfortable this time. A few early morning dog walkers passed by. The sun climbed higher in the sky. What do you say, Marcus? Kevin asked finally. Will you give us a second chance? Marcus stared at the empty coffee cup in his hands. The morning had gone nothing like he'd expected. When he'd spotted Kevin across the park, his first instinct had been to run, to disappear back into the streets where he'd learned to be invisible. But he hadn't run. Maybe he was tired of running. Maybe some small part of him had been waiting for this moment ever since Kevin Durant became a household name. I don't know, Kevin, Marcus said finally. It's been a long time. I know, Kevin replied, and that's on me. I should have tried harder to stay in touch. Marcus shook his head. It wasn't all on you. I could have reached out too. He looked up at Kevin. Truth is, I was jealous. You were living our dream and I was stuck. Tell me what happened, Kevin said. Really happened. After I left for Oak Hill. Marcus took a deep breath. For a moment, he considered lying, making his story sound better than it was. But what was the point? Kevin could probably find out the truth if he wanted to. For a while, things were good, Marcus began. I finished high school, got decent grades, even got a basketball scholarship to a small college. Nothing fancy like your offers, but it was something. Kevin nodded, encouraging him to continue. First, year went okay. I wasn't a star, but I played. Then in sophomore year, I tore my ACL. Bad tear. 3 surgeries, and it still wasn't right. Marcus rubbed his left knee unconsciously. Lost my scholarship. Had to drop out. Man, I'm sorry, Kevin said softly. I didn't know. How could you? I didn't tell anyone. Too proud, I guess. Marcus shrugged. Came back home. Got a job at the auto shop on Lincoln Street. Was doing okay, saving a little money. Then Mom got sick. Marcus paused, the memory still painful. Pancreatic cancer. By the time they found it, it was already spread. She needed a lot of care. I took time off work, then started missing shifts when she had bad days. Boss was understanding at first, but business is business. Kevin nodded. He knew how expensive healthcare could be, how quickly bills could pile up. Lost my job. Used all my savings for her medical bills. When she died, I had nothing left. Couldn't pay rent. Got evicted. Marcus's voice grew quieter. Stayed with friends for a while, but you can only crash on someone's couch for so long before you wear out. You're welcome. Why didn't you call me? Kevin asked. I would have helped, Marcus laughed bitterly. You were Rookie of the Year, living the dream. What was I supposed to say? Hey, congrats on the big contract. By the way, I'm homeless? Yes, Kevin said, his voice rising. That's exactly what you should have said. We promised, Marcus. We promised we'd always be there for each other. Promises, Marcus muttered. That pinky promise we made when we were kids? That's what you're talking about? Yes, that promise, Kevin insisted. You promised we'd always be there for each other. I promised the same. Well, you broke that promise first, Marcus said, a flash of the old anger returning. When you left for Oak Hill, you said we'd talk all the time, that nothing would change. But things did change. Your calls got less frequent. Your visits stopped. Completely. Kevin couldn't deny it. You're right. I got caught up in my new life. New friends, new opportunities. I'm sorry. I'm not asking for an apology, Marcus said. I'm just saying we were kids. Kids make promises they can't keep. They sat in silence for a moment. A garbage truck rumbled past on the street. The park was filling up with more people now. Mothers with young children, elderly folks feeding birds. Remember when Coach Thomas made us run laps in the rain because we were late to practice? Kevin asked suddenly. A small smile tugged at Marcus's lips. Yeah, we were late because we stopped to help Mrs. Johnson carry her groceries. And we were so mad at Coach, Kevin continued. We said we'd quit the team. But we didn't, Marcus finished. We showed up the next day, right on time. You know why I remember that day so clearly? Kevin asked. Because you told me something I never forgot. You said, sometimes you gotta do the hard thing because it's the right thing. Marcus looked surprised. I said that. Sounds too wise for a 13-year-old. You did, and you were right. Kevin leaned forward. Marcus, I know reaching out to me would have been hard. Asking for help is always hard, but it would have been the right thing. Marcus didn't answer. He looked away, watching a mother push her child on a swing. What do you want from me, Kevin? He asked finally. Really want? Because if it's to ease your conscience, consider it. Done. You found me, we talked. You can go back to your life knowing old Marcus is still kicking. That's not what I want, Kevin said firmly. I want my friend back. I want to help you. Not because I feel guilty, but because that's what friends do for each other. And how exactly do you plan to help me? Marcus asked skeptically. You gonna write a check, pat yourself on the back, and fly off to your next game? Kevin shook his head. No. That's not how this works. I want to help you get back on your feet, whatever that takes. I don't need saving, Marcus said, his voice hard. I've been taking care of myself for a long time. Living on the streets isn't taking care of yourself, Kevin countered. And everyone needs help sometimes. Even me. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You? What could Kevin Durant, NBA superstar, possibly need help with? Kevin looked down at his hands. Believe it or not, my life isn't perfect. I've got money, fame, success, all the things we dreamed about. But most days, I feel empty, like something's missing. Poor rich guy, Marcus muttered, but there was less heat in his words. I'm not asking for pity, Kevin said. I'm just saying that having all the stuff we thought would make us happy, it doesn't. Not by itself, anyway. Marcus was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. I have a place I stay sometimes. It's not much, just a room in an old building where I do maintenance work for the owner. But it's a roof. I'm not sleeping on the streets every night. Kevin nodded, relieved to hear this. That's good. That's a start. I pick up odd jobs, fix things for people. Mr. Gino at the pizza place, Lou's Diner, the convenience store, they let me work for food sometimes. Marcus straightened his shoulders. I'm not some helpless case, Kevin. I've got my pride left, if nothing else. I know that, Kevin said, and I respect it. But let me ask you something. If our situations were reversed, if I was the one struggling, would you help me? Marcus didn't hesitate. Of course I would. Then why can't you let me help you? The question hung in the air between them. Marcus had no good answer. One step at a time, Kevin said gently. We start small. Maybe dinner tonight? A real dinner, not just coffee and a sandwich. After what seemed like forever, Marcus nodded. Okay, dinner. But I'm not making any promises beyond that. Kevin smiled. It was a start, a second chance. No promises, he agreed. Just dinner between old friends. They agreed to meet at a restaurant called Parkside at 7 o'clock. Kevin picked it because it wasn't too fancy, but still had good food. He didn't want Marcus to feel uncomfortable, but he also wanted to treat his friend to a nice meal. Kevin arrived early and asked for a table in the back, away from windows. He didn't want people recognizing him and interrupting their dinner. 7 o'clock came and went. No Marcus. At 7:15, Kevin started to worry. Had Marcus changed his mind? Had something happened to him? At 7:30, just as Kevin was about to call the search off, Marcus walked in. He had changed his clothes. He wore clean jeans, a button-up shirt that looked a size too big, and shoes that were worn but polished. Sorry, I'm late, Marcus said, as he sat down. Took longer to get ready than I thought. Kevin noticed that Marcus's hair was damp, like he just showered. He'd shaved too, revealing a face that looked younger, more like the Marcus from their high school days. No problem, Kevin said. You look good. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Borrowed the shirt from my neighbor. He lets me use his shower sometimes. The waiter came and handed the menus. Marcus stared at his for a long time. Everything looks good, Kevin said, trying to make Marcus feel at ease. Everything looks expensive, Marcus muttered. It's on me, Kevin said. Order whatever you want. Marcus looked up sharply. I told you, I don't want charity. It's not charity. It's dinner, Kevin said firmly. Friends buy each other dinner all the time. After a moment, Marcus nodded. Fine, but next time, I pick the place. Kevin smiled. Next time. That was progress. They ordered steaks, potatoes, and vegetables. As they waited for the food, Kevin told Marcus about his basketball career, his teammates, his travels around the country. Sounds nice, Marcus said. All those fancy hotels and private planes. It has its moments, Kevin admitted. But it gets lonely too. Always on the road, never in one place long enough to call it home. The food arrived, and Kevin watched as Marcus tried not to eat too quickly. It had probably been a long time since he'd had a steak this good. So, where do you stay? Kevin asked carefully. You mentioned a room where you do maintenance work? Marcus nodded. Old building on Chestnut Street. Owner is this old guy, Mr. Benson. He lets me stay in the basement room in exchange for fixing things around the building. Plumbing, electrical, whatever needs doing. That's good, Kevin said, that you have a place. It's not always available, Marcus admitted. Sometimes Mr. Benson's grandson stays there. Then I stay at the shelter on Pine Street. Or, he trailed off. Or outside, Kevin finished for him. Marcus looked down at his plate. Yeah, there are a few spots in the neighborhood that are safe enough. Under the bridge by the creek, behind the old library. I know which places to avoid. Kevin tried to imagine Marcus sleeping outside, in the cold, in the rain. It made his chest hurt. "What about tonight?" Kevin asked. "Do you have a place tonight?" Marcus shrugged. "Mr. Benson's grandson is in town, so the room's not available. Shelter might have a bed. They usually do on weeknights." "I could get you a hotel room," Kevin offered. Marcus shook his head immediately. "No. Why not? It's just a room for the night." "Because that's not how this works, Kevin," Marcus said, his voice rising slightly. "You can't just throw money at my problems and think that fixes everything." A few people at nearby tables looked over. Kevin lowered his voice. "I'm not trying to fix everything. I'm just offering a warm, safe place to sleep." "And I appreciate that," Marcus said. "But no, this is my life now. I need to handle it my way." Kevin was about to argue when an idea hit him. A crazy idea, but maybe the right one. "Then I'll stay with you tonight," he said. Marcus nearly choked on his water. "What?" "I'll stay with you, wherever you're staying tonight." Marcus stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You're not serious." "I am," Kevin insisted. "If you're going to the shelter, I'll go with you. If you're sleeping under the bridge, I will too." "Why would you do that?" Marcus asked, genuinely confused. "Because I want to understand," Kevin said simply. "I want to understand what your life is like now." Marcus shook his head. "That's crazy. You have a hotel room. A nice one, I bet." "I'd already do," Kevin nodded. "And it'll still be there tomorrow. Tonight, I'm with you." "Your agent would have a heart attack," Marcus said with a small laugh. NBA star Kevin Durant spends night in homeless shelter. Can you imagine the headlines? "Don't care," Kevin said, and he meant it. "No one has to know. This isn't for the cameras or social media. This is just for us." Marcus studied Kevin's face, looking for any sign that he was joking. He found none. "You're serious about this?" he said finally. "I am," Kevin confirmed. "One night, your life, your rules." Marcus sat back in his chair. "You wouldn't last an hour. Try me," Kevin challenged. For the first time that day, Marcus smiled a real smile. "Okay, KD, you're on, but don't say I didn't warn you." Kevin woke up with a pain in his back. He was cold, and something hard was pressing against his side. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. This wasn't his hotel room with its soft, king-sized bed. This wasn't his mansion back home. Then it all came back to him. He was under the Jefferson Street Bridge with Marcus, sleeping on cardboard and newspapers, spending the night just like Marcus did when he had nowhere else to go. Kevin sat up slowly, his muscles protesting. He had slept in his clothes, jeans and a hoodie he had bought at a discount store after dinner. His expensive clothes and shoes were in a bag at his hotel, along with his wallet and most of his cash. Marcus had insisted he leave them behind. "No one's going to rob Kevin Durant," Marcus had said, "but they might rob some random guy with nice things." Kevin looked around. The first light of dawn was creeping under the bridge. A few feet away, Marcus was already awake, sitting cross-legged on his piece of cardboard. He was eating something from a small plastic container. "Morning, Sleeping Beauty," Marcus said with a smirk. "Sleep well?" Kevin groaned and stretched. "Not really. How do you do this?" "You get used to it," Marcus shrugged. "Though you never really get used to the cold or the noise." During the night, cars had rumbled over the bridge every few minutes, the sound echoing loudly around them. "What time is it?" Kevin asked. "Around 6, Marcus answered. He held out the plastic container. "Oatmeal? Mrs. Chen at the corner store gives me leftovers sometimes." Kevin's stomach growled. He was hungrier than he had been in a long time, Even after their big dinner, sleeping outside had burned through his energy. He accepted the container gratefully. "Thanks," he said, taking a small bite. The oatmeal was cold and bland, but he was too hungry to care. "So," Marcus said, watching Kevin eat. "One night on the streets. What do you think?" Kevin took another bite before answering. "I think it's awful. I'm cold, sore, hungry, and I probably smell bad." "Welcome to my world," Marcus said with a hollow laugh. "How long have you been living like this?" Kevin asked. Marcus looked away. "Off and on for about 5 years. Sometimes I get ahead, find a place to stay for a while. Then something happens, get sick, lose a job, whatever, and I'm back here." Kevin felt a wave of shame. While he had been living in luxury, Marcus had been fighting just to survive. "I'm sorry, Marcus," he said quietly. "For what? You didn't put me here." "Maybe not directly," Kevin admitted. "But I broke our promise. I wasn't there when you needed someone." Marcus was quiet for a long time. A jogger ran past on the path near the bridge, not even glancing their way. Invisible. That's how people like Marcus became. Invisible to the world passing by. "One night doesn't make you understand," Marcus said finally. "You're going back to your hotel. Back to your life. I'm staying here. It doesn't have to be this way," Kevin insisted. "Let me help you, Marcus. For real help, not just one night." Marcus studied Kevin's face. "You're serious, aren't you? You really want to help." "Yes," Kevin said firmly. "Tell me what you need." "That's just it. I don't know what I need anymore," Marcus admitted. "I've been surviving so long, I've forgotten how to actually live." Kevin thought for a moment. "What if I got you an apartment? Someplace safe, permanent?" Marcus immediately shook his head. "No, I told you, I don't want charity." "Then what about a job?" Kevin suggested. "Something steady." "What kind of job? Who's going to hire me? I haven't had a steady job in years. My clothes are from donation. Bins! I don't even have an address to put on an application." The bitterness was creeping back into Marcus's voice. Kevin refused to give up. "There has to be something. Everyone has skills. What are you good at?" Despite his frustration, Marcus seemed to consider the question. "I'm good with my hands, fixing things, like I do for Mr. Benson." "That's a start," Kevin said encouragingly. "Maybe we could find you work as a maintenance person for an apartment building or a school." For the first time, Marcus looked thoughtful instead of defensive. "Maybe, but I'd need a place to live first. Need to clean up, get some decent clothes. It's a circle I can't break out of." "Then let me help you break it," Kevin said. "Not as a handout, but as a friend. Let me be the friend I should have been all along." Marcus picked up a small stone and turned it over in his hands. "I'm not a charity case, Kevin." "No, you're not," Kevin agreed. "You're my oldest friend, and friends help each other when they're down." The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows under the bridge. A new day, maybe a new beginning. "What do you say?" Kevin asked. Marcus looked up at the brightening sky. Birds were singing somewhere nearby. The world was waking up to a new day. Maybe it was time for him to wake up too. "If I agree to this," he said slowly, "we do it my way." Kevin tried not to look too excited. "Your way? Got it. What does that mean exactly?" Marcus stood up and brushed the dirt from his clothes. "It means I'm not taking handouts. Whatever help you give me, I work for it. I earn it." Kevin stood too, wincing as his stiff muscles protested. One night sleeping rough, and he could barely move. How did Marcus do this day after day? That's fair, Kevin agreed. What kind of work are you thinking? I don't know yet, Marcus admitted. But I'll figure it out. I always do. They gathered their few belongings. Kevin had only his hoodie and the clothes he was wearing. Marcus had his backpack containing everything he owned in the world. First things first, Kevin said. I need a shower and some food. Real food, Marcus laughed. One night outside, and you're already soft. I was already soft, Kevin corrected with a grin. Now, I'm just honest about it. They walked to Kevin's hotel. The doorman gave them a suspicious look as they approached, his eyes lingering on Marcus's worn clothes and backpack. Can I help you? The doorman asked, stepping slightly in front of the door. Yes, thank you, Kevin said politely, pulling off his hood. I'm a guest here. The doorman's eyes widened. Mr. Durant, I'm so sorry. I didn't recognize you. No problem, Kevin said. This is my friend Marcus. He'll be joining me for breakfast. The doorman nodded quickly, opening the door with a flourish. Of course, sir. Enjoy your day. In the elevator, Marcus shook his head. Must be nice. Doors just open for you. Not all doors, Kevin said quietly. The important ones you have to open yourself. Marcus gave him a look. When did you get so philosophical? I had a good teacher once, Kevin replied. A kid from East Side who told me life wasn't about taking the easy path. In Kevin's hotel suite, Marcus whistled. This is bigger than Mr. Benson's whole first floor. How much does this place cost per night? Kevin shrugged. I don't know. The team arranges it. Marcus shook his head again. Two different worlds, man. You can shower first, Kevin offered, pointing to the bathroom. There are clean towels and everything in there. While Marcus showered, Kevin ordered breakfast from room service. Eggs, bacon, pancakes, fruit, coffee, juice, the works. Huss was starving after their night outside, and he guessed Marcus was too. When the food arrived, Marcus was just coming out of the bathroom. He had changed back into his own clothes, but his face looked fresher, younger. His hair was clean and combed back. Feel better? Kevin asked. Like a new man, Marcus admitted, eyeing the food. Is all that for us? Dig in, Kevin encouraged him. They ate in silence for a few minutes, both too hungry for conversation. Finally, with their plates half empty, Kevin spoke. I've been thinking about what you said, about working for any help you get. Marcus nodded cautiously. And? What if I helped you get a small apartment? Something safe, nothing fancy. You could pay me, back over time, however you can. Marcus considered this. I'd need a job first, a real job with a paycheck. We can work on that too, Kevin assured him. But the apartment comes first. You need an address to apply for most jobs. Marcus put down his fork. Why are you doing this, Kevin? Really? Kevin didn't answer right. Away. He looked out the window at the city spreading out below them. Finally, he turned back to Marcus. Because when I saw you again, I realized something. All this? He gestured around the fancy hotel room. It doesn't mean anything if you forget where you came from. Who helped you get there? Marcus nodded slowly. I get that. But still, it's a lot. Not for me, Kevin said honestly. And it would mean a lot more to help you than to buy another car or another house I don't need. Marcus picked up his coffee cup, staring into it as if looking for answers. If I say yes, we do this right. Legal, contract, and everything. I pay you. Back every penny? Deal, Kevin said immediately. We'll write it up however you want. And I find my own job, Marcus continued. I appreciate the help, but I need to stand on my own feet. Absolutely, Kevin agreed, though I might know some people who could use a good maintenance man. For The first time, a real smile spread across Marcus's face. "Yeah, okay. I could look into that." They finished breakfast, discussing the details. A small apartment in a safe area, basic furniture, enough to get Marcus on his feet again. As they were clearing the plates, Marcus suddenly turned serious. "There's one more condition." "Name it," Kevin said. "You don't disappear again," Marcus said, his voice firm. "This isn't just about money or an apartment. If we're going to be friends again, you have to be a real friend. Not just when it's convenient." Kevin held out his hand. "I promise." No more broken promises. Marcus hesitated for just a moment before shaking Kevin's hand. "Okay, then, let's do this." Kevin felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. The simple joy of doing something right, of keeping a promise that should never have been broken. "Powell and Durant," he said with a smile. "Together again." "Don't get ahead of yourself," Marcus warned, but he was smiling too. "We've got a long way to go." "But we're going together," Kevin said. "That's what matters." Over the next week, Kevin and Marcus looked at apartments together. Kevin wanted to find something nice, but Marcus insisted on something simple and affordable. They finally found a small one-bedroom place not far from their old neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and safe, with working heat and hot water. "This is perfect," Marcus said as they walked through the empty rooms. "You sure?" Kevin asked, eyeing a water stain on the ceiling. "We could keep looking." Marcus shook his head. "This is what I want. It's more than enough." Kevin signed the lease that day, putting both their names on it. Marcus insisted on that part. He wanted to be legally responsible for the place, not just living there on Kevin's charity. The next day, they went shopping for basic furniture. Again, Marcus chose simple, practical items: a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small couch, some kitchen supplies. Kevin wanted to buy a big TV, but Marcus refused. "One step at a time," he said. "Let's focus on the necessities first." They also bought Marcus some new clothes for job interviews. Nothing expensive, just a few decent shirts, pants, and a pair of good shoes. Marcus looked at himself in the mirror, barely recognizing the man staring back at him. "Looking sharp," Kevin said, standing behind him. Marcus tugged at the collar of his new shirt. "Feels strange. Been a long time since I wore anything this nice." Kevin had to return to his team for a few days, but before he left, he made sure Marcus had everything he needed. Food in the refrigerator, clean sheets on the bed, a prepaid phone so they could stay in touch. "I'll be back in a week," Kevin promised. "We have a few days off after the Chicago game." Marcus nodded. "I'll be fine. Going to start looking for work tomorrow." Kevin had offered to help with that too. He knew people who owned businesses, people who might give Marcus a chance. But Marcus wanted to try on his own first. "I need to do this my way," he explained. "Need to know I can stand on my own 2 feet." Kevin understood. He handed Marcus an envelope before leaving. "Just to tide you over until you find something." Marcus looked inside. $500 in cash. His first instinct was to refuse it, but he knew he needed to be practical. He couldn't job hunt on an empty stomach. "I'll pay back every penny," he said. "I know you will," Kevin replied. True to his word, Kevin returned a week later. He knocked on Marcus's door, not sure what to expect. Would Marcus still be there? Would he have changed his mind about accepting help? The door opened, and Kevin was relieved to see Marcus looking well. Clean-shaven, wearing one of his new shirts, a hint of a smile on his face. "You're back," Marcus said, stepping aside to let Kevin in. "I said I would be," Kevin replied, looking around the apartment. It was tidy, with a few small touches that made it feel like a home. a plant on the windowsill, a calendar on the wall, a basketball sitting in the corner. "Basketball?" Kevin asked, pointing to the ball. Marcus shrugged. "Found it at a thrift store. Couldn't resist." Kevin picked it up. "Want to shoot some hoops later? There's a court a few blocks from here." "Maybe," Marcus said. "But first, I have news." "Good news?" Kevin asked hopefully. Marcus nodded. "I found a job. Nothing big, just maintenance work at a youth center. Fixing things, keeping the place clean. But it's steady work, 5 days a week." Kevin grinned. "That's great. When do you start?" "Already started. 3 days ago." Marcus couldn't hide the pride in his voice. "The director said they've needed someone like me for a long time. Someone who can fix anything without calling expensive repair services." "I'm not surprised," Kevin said. "You were always good with your hands." They sat at Marcus's small table, catching up on the week's events. Kevin told stories about his games and teammates. Marcus talked about his new job, the people he'd met, the broken heater he'd fixed on his first day that had impressed everyone. "Want to see where I work?" Marcus asked suddenly. "It's not far from here." They walked to the youth center, a brick building with a faded sign out front. Inside, kids of various ages played games, did homework, or just hung out in a safe space. "Powell!" a gray-haired woman called out when they entered. "Sink's clogged in the kitchen again." "On it, Mrs. Taylor," Marcus replied. He turned to Kevin. "Duty calls. Make yourself at home. There's a basketball court out back." Kevin wandered through the center while Marcus fixed the sink. Some of the kids recognized him, their eyes going wide with disbelief. "Are you really Kevin Durant?" a young boy asked, no more than 10 years old. "That's me," Kevin confirmed. Word spread quickly. Soon Kevin was surrounded by excited kids asking for autographs, basketball tips, and selfies. When Marcus finished with the sink, he found Kevin in the gym, playing basketball with a group of boys. For a moment, he stood in the doorway, watching. Kevin was moving at half speed, letting the kids steal the ball, cheering when they made shots. It reminded Marcus of when they were young playing at Maple Street Park. Kevin had been the best, even then, but he'd never made the other kids feel bad about it. He'd helped them, encouraged them. Some things hadn't changed. Kevin spotted Marcus and waved him over. "Hey, we need another player." Marcus hesitated. It had been years since he'd played a real game of basketball. His knee wasn't what it used to be, but the look on Kevin's face, pure joy, like they were kids again, made him step onto the court. "I'm a little rusty," Marcus warned as a boy passed him the ball. "Just like riding a bike," Kevin encouraged him. "You never forget." Marcus dribbled the ball, the familiar feel coming back to him. He took a shot. It missed, but not by much. The next one went in. For the next hour, they played with the kids, running, laughing, teasing each other like no time had passed. For that brief time, they weren't a homeless man and an NBA star. They were just Marcus and Kevin, friends playing the game they loved. Afterward, walking back to Marcus's apartment, Kevin said, "You've still got skills." Marcus laughed. "I'm out of shape." But it felt good. "The kids loved having you play with them," Kevin remarked. "You're good with them." "They're good kids," Marcus said. "Remind me of us at that age." Kevin nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe you could coach them sometime. Teach them what Coach Thomas taught us." The idea took root in Marcus's mind. Teaching kids basketball. Giving them what he and Kevin had once had. Guidance, purpose, joy in the game. "Maybe," he said. "One step at a time." Kevin smiled. Small steps. But they were heading in the right direction. 3 weeks passed. Kevin had games and road trips, but he called Marcus every few days to check in. Each time, Marcus had good news to share. His job was going well. He had fixed up his apartment a little more. He had started helping with basketball drills at the Idri Youth Center after his regular work hours. Kevin was due to visit again soon. He had 3 days off between games and was looking forward to seeing how Marcus was doing in person. The night before his flight to D.C., Kevin's phone rang. "Mr. Durant?" It was Mrs. Taylor from the youth center. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm worried about Marcus." Kevin's heart sank. "What happened? Is he okay?" "I don't know," Mrs. Taylor said. "He hasn't come to work for 3 days, hasn't called in sick or anything. That's not like him. He's been so reliable." "Have you been to his apartment?" Kevin asked, already packing a bag. "Yes, but he's not there. The landlord let me check. His things are gone." Kevin thanked Mrs. Taylor and hung up. He called Marcus's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried again and again with the same result. Kevin caught the first flight to D.C. the next morning. His mind raced with possibilities. Had something happened to Marcus? Had he decided to go back to the streets? Had Kevin pushed too hard, too fast? In D.C., Kevin went straight to Marcus's apartment. The landlord recognized him immediately. "Mr. Durant? I didn't expect to see you again so soon." "I'm looking for Marcus Powell," Kevin explained. "Can I see his apartment?" The landlord looked uncomfortable. "He moved out, sir, 3 days ago. Didn't say where he was going. Paid the rent through the end of the month, though." Kevin's worry deepened. "Did he say anything? Leave a note?" "No, sir. Just turned in his keys and left." Kevin next tried the youth center. Mrs. Taylor hadn't heard anything new. The kids asked about Mr. Powell and seemed disappointed he wasn't there. With nowhere else to check, Kevin went back to his old neighborhood. He walked the streets of East Side looking for any sign of Marcus. He checked the small park on Bradford Avenue, the bridge where they had spent the night, Gino's Pizza, Lou's Diner. No one had seen Marcus for days. By evening, Kevin was losing hope. He sat on a bench in Maple Street Park, staring at the basketball court where they had played as kids. Where had Marcus gone? Why had he left without saying goodbye? As the streetlights came on, Kevin noticed a figure sitting alone on a bench, across the park. Something about the way the person sat looked familiar. Kevin walked over slowly. It was Marcus, wearing his old clothes, his backpack beside him. He looked up as Kevin approached. "Figured you'd find me eventually," Marcus said, his voice flat. "What happened?" Kevin asked, sitting beside him. "Why did you leave?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He stared at the ground, his shoulders slumped. "It was too much," he said finally. "The apartment, the job, the normal life. I couldn't handle it." "I don't understand," Kevin said. "Everything seemed to be going so well." Marcus laughed bitterly. "That's the problem. It was going too well. I started to believe in it. Started to think I deserved it." "You do deserve it," Kevin insisted. Marcus shook his head. "You don't get it. For years, I've been nobody, invisible. Then suddenly I have an address, a job, people who count on me. It scared me, Kevin. I kept waiting for it all to fall apart." "So, you made it fall apart first," Kevin said, understanding dawning on him. "Better to leave on my own terms than to lose it all again later," Marcus admitted. They sat in silence for a while. A cold wind blew through the park. Marcus pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders. "Where have you been staying?" Kevin asked. "Here and there," Marcus answered vaguely. "Old spots." "Under the bridge again?" Marcus nodded. "It's not so bad. I'm used to it," Kevin sighed. You don't have to be used to it. You had a good thing going, Marcus. The kids at the center miss you. Mrs. Taylor is worried sick. They'll get over it, Marcus said, but his voice wavered slightly. People always do. Is that what you think happened with us? Kevin asked quietly. That I got over you? Forgot about you? Marcus didn't answer. Because I didn't, Kevin continued. I thought about you all the time. Wondered where you were, what you were doing. I just didn't know how to find you. And now you have, Marcus said. And look at me, right back where I started. Only if you choose to be, Kevin said firmly. Look, I get it. Change is scary. Building a new life is hard. But going back to the streets isn't the answer. Maybe for me it is, Marcus argued. Maybe that's all I'm good for now. Kevin shook his head. That's not true, and you know it. I've seen you with those kids at the center. I've seen how good you are at your job. You belong there, not under some bridge. Marcus was quiet for a long time. A police car drove slowly past the park. The officer inside glanced at them suspiciously, before moving on. I don't know if I can do it, Marcus said finally, his voice small. What if I fail again? Then we try something else, Kevin said simply. Together. Marcus looked up, meeting Kevin's eyes. Why do you even care? Why not just let me go? Because you're my oldest friend, Kevin answered. Because once upon a time, you would have done the same for me. Because some promises are worth keeping, even when it's hard. The night grew colder around them. Marcus picked up a leaf that had fallen on the bench, turning it over in his fingers. I can't go back. To the apartment, he said. Not right away, it's too much. Then we find something else, Kevin suggested. One step at a time, remember? Marcus nodded slowly. One step at a time. That night, Kevin convinced Marcus to stay in a small motel. Nothing fancy, just a clean place with a warm bed. Kevin took the room next door, wanting to give Marcus space while still being nearby. In the morning, they met for breakfast at a local diner. Marcus looked better after a night in a real bed. He'd showered and changed into some of the cleaner clothes from his backpack. So what now? Kevin asked as they waited for their food. Marcus stirred his coffee thoughtfully. I don't know. I'm not sure I want to go back to the youth center. Not as a maintenance guy anyway. Why not? You were good at it. It was fine, Marcus agreed. But when I was playing basketball with those kids, helping them with drills, that felt different. That felt right. Kevin leaned forward, interested. So, maybe coaching is more your thing? Maybe, Marcus said. But who would hire me to coach? I don't have any qualifications. You played high school ball. You know the game. Kevin paused. What about volunteering first? Build up some experience? Their food arrived. Pancakes for Kevin, eggs and toast for Marcus. They ate quietly for a few minutes. There's something else, Marcus said finally. When I was under the bridge these past few days, I met some other guys. Homeless vets, mostly. Good people who've had bad luck. Kevin nodded, listening. They don't have anyone, Marcus continued. No one checking on them, making sure they're okay. It got me thinking, about what? Kevin prompted. About how lucky I am to have someone who cared enough to come looking for me. Marcus looked directly at Kevin. Not everyone has that. Kevin understood where this was going. You want to help them. I want to try, Marcus said. These people need more than just a meal or a bed for the night. They need someone who understands, someone who's been there. Kevin thought about this. It made sense. Marcus had a unique perspective. He'd lived on the streets, but he'd also found a way back. He could be a bridge between two worlds. What would that look like? Kevin asked. Practically speaking, Marcus shrugged. I'm not sure yet. Maybe some kind of outreach program? Something connected to a shelter, but more personal? The idea took shape as they talked. Marcus could work with homeless people, helping them navigate the system, find services, maybe even jobs. He could use his own experience to connect with people who often distrusted authority. I think you'd be good at that, Kevin said. Really good. For the first time in days, Marcus smiled. You think? I know it, Kevin assured him. You always had a way with people. And now you have experience that most social workers don't have. By the end of breakfast, Marcus had a new plan. He would talk to the director of a local shelter, see if they needed someone like him. He would start as a volunteer if necessary, just to get his foot in the door. What about a place to live? Kevin asked. The apartment is still yours if you want it. Marcus shook his head. Not yet. I need something simpler for now. Maybe just a room somewhere. That afternoon, they found a small room for rent in a house not far from the shelter. The landlady, Mrs. Washington, was an older woman who took an immediate liking to Marcus. You remind me of my son, she told him. He's in the military now, stationed overseas. The room was simple: a bed, a dresser, a desk by the window. Perfect for what Marcus needed. Kevin paid the first month's rent, despite Marcus's objections. Consider it an investment, Kevin said, in your new direction. The next day, they visited the Pine Street shelter. The director, Mr. Collins, listened attentively as Marcus explained his idea. We could definitely use someone with your experience, Mr. Collins said. We have caseworkers, but none who've actually lived on the streets. You could provide a perspective we're missing. Marcus would start as a part-time volunteer, with the possibility of a paid position if things worked out. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A new direction. Walking back from the shelter, Marcus seemed lighter somehow, more focused. Thank you, he said suddenly. For what? Kevin asked. For not giving up on me, Marcus replied. For finding me. Again. Kevin smiled. That's what friends do. As they reached Mrs. Washington's house, Marcus hesitated at the gate. I need to do this my way, he said. Build something that's mine, not just something you gave me. I understand, Kevin said, and I'll support you however I can. Marcus nodded. I know you will, but from a distance for a while, okay? I need to stand on my own feet. It wasn't what Kevin wanted to hear, but he respected Marcus's decision. Promise you'll keep in touch? No more disappearing acts? Promise, Marcus said. He held out his pinky finger, just like when they were kids. Kevin linked his pinky with Marcus's. Friends forever. Friends forever, Marcus agreed. 6 months passed. Kevin and Marcus kept in touch with regular phone calls and text messages. Kevin respected Marcus's wish for space, focusing on his basketball season while Marcus built his new life. And build he did. What started as a volunteer position at the Pine Street shelter grew into something bigger. Marcus had a natural ability to connect with people living on the streets. He knew where to find them, how to talk to them, how to earn their trust. Mr. Collins recognized Marcus's talent and created a new position for him, Outreach Coordinator. Marcus's job was to find homeless people who weren't coming to the shelter and connect them with services they needed. Kevin followed Marcus's progress from afar, proud of his friend but careful not to interfere. He sent occasional care packages, warm socks, gift cards for food, basketball tickets for the kids at the shelter, but always with notes saying, "No strings attached." When the basketball season ended, Kevin called Marcus with news. "I've been working on something," Kevin said. "A project in D.C. I'd like you to see it." "What kind of project?" Marcus asked, instantly suspicious. Kevin laughed. "You'll have to. See it to believe it. Meet me at 1200 Pine Street tomorrow at noon." "That's right near the shelter," Marcus noted. "What are you up to, Durant?" "Just be there," Kevin said. "And wear something nice. There might be cameras." The next day, Marcus arrived at the address Kevin had given him. He stopped in surprise. The old abandoned building that had stood there for years was gone. In its place was a beautiful new 3-story building, still surrounded by construction equipment. Kevin stood out front, talking to a group of people in business suits. When he spotted Marcus, he waved him over. "There he is," Kevin said to the group. "The man I've been telling you about." Marcus approached cautiously, suddenly aware of his simple button-up shirt and khaki pants. He should have worn a tie. "Marcus, meet the mayor and some city council members," Kevin said. "They've been helping with permits for our new center." "Your new center?" Marcus asked, confused. Kevin grinned. "Not my center, our center. Come on, I'll show you." As they walked toward the building, Marcus noticed a large sign that hadn't yet been installed, leaning against the wall. "Powell's Place, a home for new beginnings." Marcus stopped in his tracks. "What is this, Kevin?" "This," Kevin said proudly, "is what happens when an NBA player has too much money and a friend with a good idea." For the next hour, Kevin gave Marcus a tour of the nearly completed building. The first floor had offices, counseling rooms, and a cafeteria. The second floor had classrooms, a computer lab, and a small medical clinic. The third floor had temporary housing units, small but dignified spaces where people could stay while getting back on their feet. "This is..." Marcus couldn't find the words. "I don't understand. Remember when you told me about wanting to help homeless people, but doing more than just providing a meal or a bed?" Kevin asked. "That got me thinking. I have the money to build something like this, but I didn't have the vision or the experience. You do?" "You're saying this is my idea?" Marcus asked, still stunned. "It's your idea, brought to life," Kevin confirmed. "Powell's Place, a center that treats homeless people like human beings, that helps them rebuild their lives with dignity." Marcus walked slowly through the building, taking it all in. Everything was thoughtfully designed, practical but also beautiful, respectful. "I can't run a place like this," Marcus said finally. "I don't know how." "You won't have to do it alone," Kevin assured him. "I've hired experienced staff. But you'll be the heart of this place, Marcus. You'll be the director, if you want the job." "Director?" Marcus echoed. "Me? Who better?" Kevin asked. "You understand both sides, what it's like to need help and what it's like to give it. That's rare." Outside the building, more people had gathered. Reporters, photographers, community members. A podium had been set up for a press conference. "The mayor wants to make some remarks about the new center," Kevin explained. "Then they'd like us to say a few words and cut the ribbon." "Us?" Marcus asked weakly. "You don't have to if you don't want to," Kevin said quickly. "I can handle it." Marcus looked around at the building, at the people gathering outside, at his friend standing beside him. 6 months ago, he had been sleeping under a bridge, convinced he didn't deserve better. Now, he was being offered the chance to help others, find their way back, just as he had. "I'll do it," Marcus said, straightening his shoulders. "This is important." The press conference began. The mayor spoke about community renewal and helping those in need. Kevin talked about the importance of giving back to the neighborhood that raised him. Then it was Marcus's turn. He stepped up to the microphone, nervous but determined. "My name is Marcus Powell," he began. "6 months ago, I was homeless. Before that, I had lost everything: my home, my job, my hope. But I was lucky. Someone cared enough to find me, to help me find my way back." He looked at Kevin, who nodded encouragingly. "Powell's Place will be more than just a shelter," Marcus continued, growing more confident. "It will be a community, a place where people can find not just food and a bed, but respect, skills, purpose, a future." After the speeches, Kevin and Marcus stood together to cut the ribbon. Cameras flashed around them. A reporter pushed forward with a question. "Mr. Durant, what inspired you to create this center? Was it part of your foundation's work?" Kevin looked at Marcus, then back at the reporter. "This center exists because of Marcus Powell," he said clearly. "Not just because it bears his name, but because he saved my life once." A hush fell over the crowd. This was not what anyone had expected to hear. "When we were kids," Kevin continued, "I was going through a hard time, being bullied, feeling like I'd never make it. One night, I was in a dark place, ready to make a terrible choice." Kevin's voice grew quiet, but in the silence, everyone could hear him. "Marcus found me that night, talked to me for hours, made me see that I had a future worth living for." Kevin looked directly at Marcus. "I wouldn't be here today without him. He saved me then, and finding him again saved me now." Marcus stood speechless, tears in his eyes. He hadn't known Kevin remembered that night, hadn't known it had meant so much. As cameras flashed around them, Kevin and Marcus embraced. No longer the NBA star and the homeless man, but simply two friends who had found their way back to each other. Powell's Place would be their legacy, a promise kept. If this story of Kevin Durant and Marcus Powell touched your heart, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content. For another moving story that will tug at your heartstrings just as much, click the video appearing on your screen right now. These real-life journeys of friendship, redemption, and second chances remind us that behind every success story, there's often someone who believed in us when we needed it most.